Hi, people.
Everyone's
Hello.
saying hi.
Hello.
Okay.
All right. So, hi everyone. I'm Jillian from the Sage Crystals,
And I'm Christina from Crystalline Gems.
and Yael over there is holding the phone and will be the one who's reading your comments and questions because we don't have a stand.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yael. Shout out to our human tripod.
Yes.
Quad pod.
Yes.
Okay, well, so thank you for having me on your feed today. We wanted to talk about, do you mind if I kick it off?
Go for it.
We wanted to talk about ethics in crystals and in crystal mining. And I know Jillian and Yael over at Sage Crystals, where you guys are, obviously, you know that now,
Yes.
have been getting a lot of questions specifically about Camerarite. I've been getting some messages, as I usually do around this time when we're at the gem shows, about just the sheer quantity of crystals that we're seeing and just the ethics in general of mining them from the earth. So Jillian was kind enough to invite me on to talk with you guys as well and just have a conversation. That's my phone in the background. My children are wreaking havoc in the bathtub as we speak. And I'm a little worried for my husband, but he's going to be okay.
It's gonna be fun.
I told him, I'm not available for an hour. He's okay. He looked so stressed. But anyway, we're here talking about crystals.
Yes.
So where do you want to start?
Well, I think we should start with the
Camerarite.
Camerarite.
So I thought it was Camerarite. We spoke to an Indian vendor here, when we'll get deep into that in just a moment. But for the proper pronunciation, they pronounce the M twice, so it's K-A-M-M. So if you're curious, I like to know how to pronounce stones properly. It's kind of like in memory. They do Camerarite.
That's 3 M.
Camerarite.
Camerarite. So that's the stone we're talking about today. What's the stone we're talking about today?
Camerarite. So this stone it was last year's 2019 Stone of the Year. It was available before then, but only in very small quantities. And then they found this particular mine in India, in eastern India, in the state of Orissa. And it's still, last year it hit the market. Everyone was really excited about it, partly because it was the 2019 Stone of the Year, and also because it hadn't really been seen in slightly larger quantities than they had before. And this year, it's no different. People are still really excited about it. It's a really powerful, potent metaphysical crystal. So having access to it is very exciting for many of us as we're interested in the healing properties of crystals.
I love it. I talk about it when I sell it. It's a crown heart chakra bridge crystal. And the Camerarite is actually the bright reddish purple, and then it's in a bed of banded serpentine. So that's how you get the green and purple, reddish, magenta swirls within it. So it's pretty special. I've been carrying it for a few years, but a couple years ago I was only able to get it in very, very, very tiny temples, and they were very expensive. And now the price has dropped because we have found more products. So if you're ever curious, we can also talk a little bit about the pricing of crystals too, because that's really an important question to address. You might have seen Camerarite more expensive 2 years ago or even a year ago, because if new pockets are found, there's more quantity, and then suddenly the price starts to shift and change. Also, I'm not sick, I just sound horrible because of the dry desert air, so I'll make it. It's a running theme with my people. I tend to lose my voice in the second hour of live sales, so we're hanging in there. But so it's really important to keep that in mind as you look at the pricing of things, why affordable Camerarite now exists. Right now we're talking about the ethics of mining it, and the questions have been around the state of Orissa and the state of the mines of not just Camerarite but also other stones as well, because keeping in mind that Orissa is a large area. It's not just one, it's not the name of a mine, it's the name of a state in India.
So if you imagine California, there's various places in California, so it's quite a large area. India is quite a large country. So recently there was some hoopla, I guess we could call it.
I love that word,
hoopla, about this particular stone, Camerarite, which I'm pronouncing now incorrectly, but that's
I like it. It's good.
I'm going to stop
You
every
roll
time
with it.
otherwise. So yes, there was a study that all of a sudden got like pulled up and passed around about how in the state of it was a very, very large 265-page study about child labor actually around the world, and specifically in India and in Asia. And there was a very, very small section about the state of Orissa and how there has been evidence of child mining in Orissa. So because of this, it kind of blew up in a little, not like hugely, but it definitely blew up. There were all these questions started coming up about, well, what about the Camarerite? Like, does that mean that it's mined by children? Is this not a good stone? Oh, some people are deciding that they're never going to carry it. Some people are worried if they purchased it, is this no longer a stone that they should be able to purchase or that they should support? Are the shops going to sell it? Not legitimate shops if they say that there's, ethically sourced, but the state is no longer known for being like a place that has ethical laws.
And these are all wonderful questions. Like, I know that you guys do this with your shop and your followers as well, but I always encourage questions to be asked because we've talked about this before, but the state of the world and the state of mining continues to fluctuate and change. It's not like you can say like one mine is ethically conducting themselves environmentally and humanely speaking, and then it stays that way forever. There are always changes in the mineral industry. Crystals come, crystals go, mines are depleted, new mines are found, new pockets are found in existing mines. It's really a lesson in sitting in duality and sitting in like the in-between, this liminal space of like, nothing is ever permanent, and we have to keep that always in mind, especially when we're working with a natural material like crystals from the earth. So I do want to say, don't ever relent with your questions and your curiosity and your inquisitiveness with your sellers, because we all need that constant, consistent questioning. We pushes us to be better, and we're always striving to be better. I know for a fact that Jillian and Yael are as well. And so just a little sidebar on making sure that questions keep coming. I think they're really important.
And I think also whether it's us, honestly, this can be a lesson for any type of interaction, but if someone is stating something and it's it gives rise to fear and like a knee-jerk reaction, that's really the time, I think, to question. Like, is this legitimate? Like, it's making me feel fear, it's making me feel uncomfortable and upset, and why is it making me feel comfortable and upset? And is this actually accurate, or is this information that I need to delve deeper into on my own and find my own answers? Because I think fear is sometimes used as a tool, and unfortunately, not necessarily about this, but just in general. I think, the Socratic method is definitely something that has lost its importance in society, and being able to question and having questions be valid. And we are always questioning, and we welcome all of your questions because we're learning too. There's so much that changes. Even single mines, they may have an owner, and they will lease it out during different parts of the year to different people. And the different people who are coming in and mining will have different labor practices. So that's, there's so much gray area, and really making sure that you trust your vendors and that your vendors have all of the information that they can possibly get is so important, especially when you're using crystals as healing energetic tools, because it's like eating organic food versus food full of pesticide. It's like one of them is better for your body than the other.
And the trust issue is I say this a lot as well, so if there's anybody here I'm going to say it over and over again, but the trust piece of it is so critical, because when we're here in Tucson, behind Yael is like the city of Tucson and gorgeous mountains, and we're like on the top of the Vista, the Catalina foothills. We are here, we're shaking hands and breaking bread and hugging the vendors who have become our friends. We've worked with them and developed these long-standing relationships over literal years' time. When we're here, we're developing relationships, and a lot of times I'm going to take a quick sidebar, but I promise I'll loop it back around. The sidebar is that occasionally I'll get a DM from somebody that's like, hey, where did you get that? What booth is that from? Can you give me the name of your vendor? And I usually respond to people that this is not just a transaction of goods. This industry is not just about transacting goods. It's about building relationships. And so when the topic of trust comes up, especially in relation to the ethics of the mining of crystals, you guys have to trust us. We trust our vendors. And if there's one more line of succession, it has to be a clean line. And if I trust my vendor, but my vendor said, I went down to Mexico, I found this material, I believe, I fully believe that it's natural, I trust my source. If I trust my vendor, I know that if he says he trusts his vendor, then we're good. But you guys then have to trust us that we're down here doing the work to source those crystals, and we're asking the questions for you.
So would you say it's impossible to really determine if it's ethically sourced?
I don't think it's impossible. That's my opinion. I don't think it's impossible because short of going to the physical mine yourself, of course there's never a guarantee of anything, but there's never a guarantee of anything in this life. We actually have toyed it, we just talked about it this morning at brunch about what it would look like to have some regulatory board that oversaw the mining of crystals that then produced what is it called? A certification. And so, maybe that's in the works, and maybe they were the ones to do it. Crazier things have happened. I'm just going to toss it out there because now I've said it. And so we'll see. But thus far, currently February of 2020, we do not have any regulating board that offers a certification for the ethics of mining crystals. So that again is asking you to sit in that gray area. If you're a black and white thinking kind of person where you're like, if it doesn't have a certification, then it's not ethical. That's going to be a difficult place to sit because not many things are black and white and come with a stamp on them to tell you that they're ethical. Even that said, you brought up...
even when they do organic.
I was just going to say that. You brought up USDA.
Necessarily...
USDA organic doesn't mean shit really anymore. I mean, it doesn't necessarily. It depends on the farm. I mean, again, it's almost the exact same thing with our food, except they're ahead of us in the mineral industry. Yeah, I've got a question.
As a customer, because I'm not there, I've never been to Tucson, I don't know what exactly it is. What questions would I ask? How would I start thinking about this if I'm just at home watching lives for 4 hours?
Well, what questions? Questions for us or questions if you come to Tucson?
Just in general, we're talking about ethics, and how do I know as a customer, what to sort of start thinking about in this conversation?
Well, I think some of the really great questions are less questions and it's almost more like show and tell. And this is one of the things that I think both of us do with our vendors is we ask them to show, and this also comes with building relationships, is we've seen, not just photos, but videos. So we see they're taking their camera and they're bringing it into the mine and you can see them working. You see, also because you see them working, you see the age of the people who are in the mines. You see whether
you
they
see
have
the carving process. I've had my vendors show me videos of the carving process.
Yes. You see whether they have protected gear or not. You see whether does everyone have water, accessibility to water. When you see the videos and you're really kind of on the ground virtually, at least as much as possible, it really gives you much more of a sense of what's going on.
And I think for a typical consumer, this is why you have us, and
this is part of our job.
This is our job, and not everybody does things the way we do. I think we're very unique in that way, and I think that's why we connect on so many levels, and why we're both here together. Common marketing says that we should be competitors, but it doesn't have to be that way. But that said, as a consumer, you would need to spend so many hours and weeks and months getting to know the minerals, getting to know the miners and the locations, the locales where these crystals come from, that really you would have to take on a new job to do it. That's why we're here. That's why we come to Tucson, is why we do what we do. So it's still, again, it comes back to trust. But I think it comes back to trust. And nothing is going to be black and white. Do you have another question?
Yeah, I always wondered about the finite amount of crystals and what this means in the industry, for example, with oil and running out of natural resources.
We got to make sure we come back to Camerarite too.
Yes.
Because we have to talk about that.
Yes, we do.
So I know you want to...
Yeah.
You've got thoughts?
I have thoughts.
Jillian has thoughts.
So...
Can you see our brains working?
I know.
This Gemini brain, the Sagittarian brain, and we're just holding it together and we just want to dump it all in. In a nice way.
Yes. So we had someone who they shared a story and they tagged, I think, a few of us in it, like kind of really asking these questions about, is this okay for the earth, and what is this doing for the earth to take these things out? And I will say the way that the majority of crystals, the way that they are mined is very, very different than the way that other natural resources are mined. So when you are thinking of like metals, the elements, the minerals that are then melted down and broken down and used in computers and in cell phones, whether that's, lithium or cobalt or
copper, zinc,
all of those. The way that those are mined is so different, because unless you get like a vein of pure copper, which doesn't happen, that often relatively.
Sorry.
Oh, I like having background music.
Yeah, I got a phone
Thoughts
call.
for later.
So the way that those are really accessed, unless you find like a pure vein, such as gold, is they actually have to take rock and stone that have these minerals in them, and then they destroy them for the minute amount of metal that is available. And then everything else that's left is basically like toxic slurry, which is not good. So the way that metal and those type of minerals are mined is very detrimental to the earth, both how they take it out, because you basically have to like take out everything to get the little bit that's really there. And then toxic waste is produced because you're not using all of it, you're just like extracting the minerals that you want. And then there's nowhere to put the toxic slurry except back into the earth, which is then, toxic and kills people and animals and ecosystems. As opposed to the way that crystals are mined, they're not being ground down and broken up into dust. It's literally a piece of chrysocolla, which is copper included, and therefore they would take that and grind it up and take the copper. But we're not creating toxic slurry, and usually the way that it's mined is a hole is made in the mountainside or in the earth or wherever it might be. They go into the hole and then they mine from the inside out. So
like a tunnel.
Yeah. So there's really, and there are some exceptions, of course, which is why I say the majority of crystals are mined
Depends
this way.
on the material, right? Yeah.
But the majority of them, there's no deforestation that's really needed to happen. So the land is preserved, the animals are preserved, and the mining is happening inside the Earth's crust.
And the very, very top layer of the crust did that too.
Yes.
So for the vast majority of the crystals in like the cottage crystal industry, the gem and mineral industry, they're coming from the very, very top layer. A lot of them, like if you think about Herkimer diamonds, you can go to Herkimer County, New York, and in certain mines, there are little holes, but you're digging around and they're loose in the soil as well. So it's, we really, if we want to talk about environmental impact of human existence on the planet, we got to start talking about single fucking use plastic. Really.
Yes.
It's kind of my answer every time, and I get a little worked up about it because I really don't like plastic. But I think, I love that everybody's hearts are in the right place when it comes to these questions, because they're valid questions, and we always have to keep asking ourselves these questions. But I also want to encourage you to redirect that energy a little bit and look at the systems that are already in place that are already massively harmful and detrimental, because these strip mining for like the industrial ore minerals, these practices that are already happening are for the minerals that are in your phone that you're watching this on right now. So when we're talking about the crystal, the small cottage industry that we're working in, you're talking about crystals that have less impact being mined, but also are often byproducts too of other practices, and so they're just, it's, and
they would be trashed otherwise.
Right.
So if you think about, in Africa, there are definitely certain areas where it's probably not best to source your crystals from unless you, again, really know your vendor and you really trust your vendor. And that it's going also straight back into the villages and communities there, which is a whole other thing that we'll talk about.
We could talk about Ethiopian opals and how that money's actually going back to the farmers versus most stuff from the Congo, which is scary. Yes. And I personally don't source from the Congo anymore at this moment, but with small exceptions, knowing vendors again. But again, that's like a whole other rabbit hole.
Yes.
Couple questions.
But to answer the very initial question about the using up of the crystals, is that it does feel like there's a lot of crystals, especially when you come to the show and it's just
and
like
you see the videos,
crystals
in our stories
everywhere.
Yeah.
But, and I will say, like, there gets to the point where something will run dry. I know, like, this happened with spirit jasper. So they found this pocket of some interesting jasper, and then they named it spirit jasper. And
I love spirit jasper.
It is basically gone. Like, it took 1 year, they emptied it out, there's no more spirit jasper, because it was a tiny little pocket of this particular colored jasper. So that does happen. However, the earth is constantly in flux. There are always earthquakes and volcanoes, and crystals are always constantly being formed and being pushed up to the surface of the earth.
Does that mean crystals naturally regenerate in the earth?
I don't think
That's a question.
I don't think if you took a crystal and like put it back in the dirt, I don't know if it would.
It's a very specific, complex, perfect storm, if you will, of minerals, climate, condition, radiation, heat, and cooling in that particular locality for a crystal to form.
Yes.
So that's the short answer.
I don't know if it would regenerate, but crystals are always constantly being formed. I don't think we're ever going to run out of crystals.
And I want to say one thing to the gem show piece too. I think it's really, really important this is when you pull back and take a big, like, hawk's eye view of things, because the Tucson Gem Show is literally the largest in the world. So you're seeing the most that vendors from literally every continent on this planet have to offer, all condensed in one place. This world is a very big place. It's very small when you find out, like, you know, your childhood best friend's aunt is whatever and they live across the world and, like, blows your mind. That happens to all of us, but the sheer number of crystals you're seeing here, it's really actually not a lot.
It's such a small
when you
percentage.
think about when you've seen the world, when you travel the world, you take a bigger perspective of it.
As a consumer, is it okay if someone doesn't talk about being ethically sourced? Is it okay for me to ask them during the lives or DM them?
You should definitely ask.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Definitely.
you mean like shoppers?
If I'm a shopper and
Yeah.
the shop doesn't talk about...
Oh, definitely ask. I mean, any shop can say, sure, it's ethically sourced, and I mean, you might have to press a little further in the DMs, like get in there and ask for voice memos. Like when people ask me questions, I'm like, I'm not typing this out. I'm gonna get in. I'm gonna leave you like a 5-minute long voicemail, so that you know, like, I've done my due diligence, and not everybody does it this way. And so I think that's such a critical piece. The more you as a consumer ask sellers to source crystals ethically and to ask where they come from, the more
they're going to be
sellers
aware
are going
of it,
to do it.
and they're gonna.
It's going to push
follow
them
through.
to do it too.
Yes,
And
as
it's
opposed
hard.
to just buying the cheapest that's out there. Because usually the cheapest that's out there are not the most ethically sourced. For lack of a
Well,
better
because you have to think of the line of hands that have handled, worked with, carved, processed, packaged, brought you those pieces. Everybody, including your beloved crystal sellers, need to be making a living wage. It's really critical that you, as a consumer, and I say this with love and respect the vendors and the miners, our vendors and miners, as much as you respect us, and vice versa. It's really critical that we're paid living wage for this work as well. And so it took me a long time as a woman, as an entrepreneur and the owner of a small business to say, like, guys, I didn't pay myself for years. Like, I just started paying myself a salary, and I want to be really transparent about that because of the sheer amount of work that it takes to start and run a business on your own, let alone like start paying employees and making sure that your employees are paid fairly. It's a lot of work. So I think we need to be more transparent in general about salary and payments. In general, even if you're not an entrepreneur yourself, but you're working in a company, we need, especially as women, I imagine your following is a lot of women, just as mine is as well, because we don't talk about it enough. Everybody's a little like shady about how much they make.
It is, and it's
taboo around.
You know, and this is something that
It's a tangent. I'm sorry.
but it's true. But it is the topic of having a living wage within the United States is a topic,
whole other thing too,
because mortgages are higher than they've ever been, and people can't afford to purchase homes. They can't afford. I mean, I know millennials are not having families until much, much later because they can't afford to. And this is a problem that is worldwide, and in some countries much, much, much worse. So making sure that the crystals that we source are mined by people who are paid enough and who, one, have safe conditions, and two, are paid enough to support their families. That then it is transferred over to people who are carving it or polishing it, and that they are paid enough in safe conditions to support their families. And that then those people who are, importing it into the United States and selling it to us, that all of them are making enough to support their families. And then onto us, and then finally onto you. But that's where we can start to see, like, everyone is free to make their own choices, and we are not here to like guilt anybody. This is just a conversation that we want to have and to start, because especially if we continue, because we all have choices. We can choose to use a glass water bottle, or we can choose to like buy a bunch of plastic water bottles, and they're your choice. And same thing, you can choose to buy, an $8 amethyst. You can choose to buy a $3 amethyst cluster, or you can choose to buy a $15 amethyst cluster. And one of them may not have had all of the people who have touched it been treated fairly and been paid fairly.
Exactly. Yeah.
For the most part, are the vendors at Tucson ethically sourced, or do shows not generally vet for that initially?
Shows don't vet at all. Nope. It's our job.
Yes.
We vet. I can tell intuitively, and so this is where it comes back to that gray area, and things can't be black and white, because you're kind of relying too on our intuition and our skill. So physical
interrogation skill.
Oh, no, I meant like skills to identify a mineral, but interrogation skills work too.
Yes.
But I will see. I'll see a vendor and maybe say like I can tell by the quality. And just by the energy of a given booth. I will say. But once you start talking to them and getting to know them, they'll share with you. Like one of my long-standing vendors fed us dinner last night, made us authentic dinner from his culture, had us over to his house. We drank and ate and were merry, and we were laughing about paying ourselves as small business owners on this topic. And he said he was joking around with his partner that his workers get paid better than he does, and they've been doing this for decades. And so a lot of times, like, the owners themselves take the cut to make sure, in ethical circles, to make sure that they're, and that's not just me and you, that's our vendors too. So, no, there are no regulations at the shows, there are no regulations in the industry. It's sitting in the gray area and that liminal space of crystal ethics.
And part of it is also, we've been around the block enough to really understand pricing. So if you see if we're there and we see something and it's like, that's too low, like there's no way that this could get to this point where we're here to purchase it and be that low without something being off. And so that's also just experience buying and selling and really getting to know the crystals and really getting to know the process, and also where it comes from, because something that comes from Canada is going to be priced very differently than something that comes from India, because the living wage in India is very different than a living wage in Canada. And that's something else that it starts to become confusing, is when you think of like a living wage as what is considered a living wage in a village in India where the entire family's needs are met and everyone is cared for, is very different than what it's going to be in the United States. So that's also something to keep in mind.
So many variables to work with, absolutely.
Have you found that there are a lot of fake crystals there at the show?
Yes. There's a lot of fake crystals.
More than before. I mean, and they're of course treated, depends on what you can consider fake crystals, but I think by now, at least speaking for me and the Crystal Lion, we have our tried and true vendors. I usually bounce around to those, and then every new gem show, I'm making a few new contacts.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I'm very loyal when it comes to my people. And I know you are too, and it's so amazing to see us even sometimes finding the same vendors, finding different vendors too, but the overlap is interesting. More questions?
Going back to the report and child labor.
Chamomile. So, let's speak a little to that. So, do you want to start?
Sure. First thing I want to say, so I read the report, and though there was a section of the report that was talking about Orissa, which is where at least the majority of the camerarite on the market is now coming from. When it was talking about the state of mining in Orissa, it was actually talking about aluminum mining. So it wasn't even talking about camerarite. It was never even mentioned in the study. It was specifically referring to aluminum mining, which I think
this
is
is the
very
report
interesting.
that you were contacted a lot about.
Yes, that was
So
shared.
your
That was
customers-
shared in another shop, and so we, we wanted to download it. So we downloaded it and we read it.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I think the thing to remember is that this is important. Like, this is a conversation that does need to be had.
I love that your customers and followers felt comfortable enough to reach out to you and be like, hey, what do you
I
think
read
about
this.
this?
Yeah.
I'm nervous. What do you think? Because it shows that they trust you.
Yes.
And that you want to know that they want to know your opinion.
Yes.
And I appreciate that Jillian and Yael had me come on as well, because I've carried chamomile for quite some time now. But in really small quantities until last year. And last year I connected with the owners of the chamomile mine. And there is one mine. The family owns it. They are the exclusive miners to it. They have exclusive rights to it. There are no children allowed on the site because it requires, so there are wild animals that can make the area unsafe at times. So there's security there to make sure that the miners are safe while they're mining the chamomile. And then everything that comes out, your vendor is supplied by my vendor, and your vendor is the only other person who is offered chamomile.
I believe so.
Perhaps it's going to show up in smaller places. There's old stock that's still popping up, so that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that anything you might see at the gem show, you don't know how old it is unless you ask. Sometimes the vendors don't know, especially if they're sourcing many different kinds of material from many different areas, even if it's all within the same country. So all of the Indian material can come from very different mines across India. But I had a conversation with my vendor yesterday and today. She's very adamant about that and very, very clear with me. And your vendor is the only other one that carries it. And
so we've already had many conversations about all the different materials that they carry, and so I went back and I was like, so this is what I was shared, and I just wanted to like triple check with you and get more information and
do your due diligence.
Yes,
yeah, absolutely.
Because like I've done it before,
it's okay
and like
ask
they showed
questions
me
over and
photos,
over again.
Yes, and they were lovely. They weren't annoyed. I think they were a little hurt. I think because it's like, why would we ever imply children?
Sure.
But one of the things that they really wanted to explain is that one, India is a different country and it has different laws. So because of that, there's things there are nuances that are different than they are here. So I wanted to really understand, like, when we say child mining, what does that mean? When we say, like, what constitutes a child in India versus what constitutes a child in the United States? Because in the United States, if you're 18 and under, you are a child. There, if you're 14 and under, you are a child. However, and this is what I really wanted to understand, because there is mining in India where they do use children. Generally, those are not crystals, because that's usually in like large industrial type of mines, and the children are not usually the ones who are going into the mines. They're usually like the runner errand kids. So I just wanted to say that there's still plenty of issues to go along with that,
and there's no way an endorsement here of child labor practices
at all.
But also to the point, to the cultural piece, it is so important. This goes back to what I was saying too about taking a bigger picture view. It's so important to consider how other cultures have initiation and treatment of minors coming of age and what that means. Here in the U.S., we expect our 15, 16, 17-year-olds to go get a fucking job. Like, get some life experience, go out, get an after-school job. You want to go buy, like, your stuff or your own clothes or whatever, go get a job. It's not a black and white, cut and dry area by any means.
And so, I mean, that could even be considered child labor, technically.
Yes,
so in India, it's similar. Like, children are in cities, and at the very least, are required to go to school. They're required to finish school, and of course, there are many issues in India as well as here, and so there are plenty of children that do slip through the cracks, and this is a whole other sociological and political issue that's happening in India. However, we're dealing with just the mining and chamomile, and the very specific chamomile mine that we're talking about, and there are, because this was the other thing I wanted to really understand, and so what she was saying, what our supplier was saying, was that one, a lot of the mines are centered around villages, and rural villages, they do not necessarily adhere to the laws that India sets, because they are villages and they have their own. In rural India, in villages, children, 14-year-olds, that is the legal age of marriage, and that is a whole other topic that we can talk about a whole other day that has nothing to do with crystals. But in villages, 14-year-olds are considered adults. They are not allowed to work in the mines because the people who are owning the mines generally do come from the cities, whether they are, most of them tend to be Indian, but they do not allow children to work in the mines. However, there are some children between the ages of like 16 and 18 that are hired part-time to work as messengers, not going into the mines at all, but that is their part-time work that they use to support their families. So this is something that I really wanted to get incredibly clear about, and I was like, I need to understand exactly how this system works. And so that was what they said, is that the villages, they tend to be relatively destitute, and so unfortunately most of the men will work in the mines, and the children who are, shall we say, older teenagers who are of age, typically who are male, they either apprentice and they learn how to carve, and that is an apprenticeship that is working their way towards being a full-time worker once they turn 18, but they still are required to go to school. They're still required, I mean, it's their part-time job, whether they learn a skill that will benefit them once they are adults, but they are in no way allowed to be in the mine. Also, the way that Camererite is mined is they have to use industrial equipment, and the children literally can't handle the machines, they're too big. So that is another thing that our supplier was like, we would never allow children in there for their own safety, but also because they can't hold the machines. Like it doesn't even make, like, it's, to them it's ludicrous. It doesn't even make sense. Right. So these are things we really wanted to be incredibly clear about, and that both of us wanted to go to our suppliers and make sure that the information we were getting is also the same, because that's how we can cross-reference and make sure.
Cross the streams, if you will.
Yes.
Sorry, old Ghostbusters reference. Anybody old enough to get it? No?
Kind of.
Well done. Yes. I hope that was clear. Are we having some questions?
Yes.
Have you guys thought about doing a guide to buying ethical crystals?
A written guide? A video guide? I'm thinking now we need to be co-hosts on stuff. Like, this is brilliant. Yep.
Could be anything. Written, video, whatever.
Sure. I mean, again, it's really tricky because a guide implies some direction, and the direction is always changing.
And it changes also from every country to from year to year, from show to show, from mine to mine, and from every country has different laws.
I mean, that guide would really be the regulations that we kind of touched on in the beginning, that we were talking with other shops this morning at the brunch that we had, that it's now a yearly tradition, which is wonderful, hosted by Jillian and Yael. That would be, you know, if we were to write that out, it would be a guideline for this a general certification process. So, not at the moment, but...
So don't always believe what you read on a post? So don't always believe what you read on a post?
I would say believe... I would take anything you ever read with a grain of salt.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. Always question, always read between the lines, don't be afraid to ask questions.
And also tune into how things make you feel. If something makes you feel like more centered and more joy-filled, and like you read something and you're like, oh God, yes, this is like just what I needed right now, then like go with your gut and with your intuition. But if you read something that makes you feel fear, or makes you feel less than, or makes you feel not enough, or makes you feel like you don't know, it may not, that's when I really, really think that it's good to question like what's going on. Not that there's people out there who are purposefully misinforming, because I don't think that's, I mean, I'm sure there are some people, but I don't think generally that's the case. But always tune into like what your intuition and how things are making you feel.
Yeah, because if it's coming from a place of fear, then your response is going to be reactive rather than intuitive or sensitive. So always, as you read things, taking it with a grain of salt, having a very critical eye, but also kind of giving yourself a body scan to see how something resonates with you.
Would that be a good guide if someone is starting out in the crystal business as to what vendors to look out for?
that might be an entirely different topic altogether.
Yes. But generally, I would say go with how things make you feel and ask many, many, many questions.
After you've educated yourself.
The theme of the day.
I think educating yourself is the first step, because asking questions that you can answer yourself, it starts to become emotional labor for others. Mm-hmm. I think that can, as I'm thinking of like social justice issues as well,
yes.
Making sure that you're doing your due diligence in any capacity, thoroughly researching something and trying to get to the bottom of it on your own before asking for others to, not us, because I think we're happy to be here and we're happy to talk to you guys about this. Just in general, if you're starting a new endeavor, making sure that you have, done your due diligence.
Done your work.
Read up, do your work. Do the work.
Yes.
Do the work.
By questions, I meant like asking suppliers. If this is what you're worried about, then making sure to ask.
Yeah.
Ask your suppliers many a question.
Mm-hmm. And I know, I'm pretty sure you guys are the same way. If somebody asks me a question, I don't know the answer, I'm going to say, fuck, I don't know the answer. I'm going to go back and figure it out. Yeah. So questions are welcomed.
And last question. As you're looking at different types of crystals like Zuni bear carvings, is there thoughts or conversations of cultural sensitivity in crystals?
I have so many thoughts on this. How much time do we have?
I don't know what time it is because I can't go to my phone.
Oh, because you can't see.
I can't look.
Hold on, this would be an entirely. How are we?
Okay.
15
minutes.
Okay, great.
For the hours up.
This is a completely tangential topic. I think if we've covered Chamomile and ethics, we could do it another day, and maybe we need to do more of this.
We could do like a split screen.
We could. I mean, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but I'm all the way in North Carolina.
No,
you guys are in
do
LA
split screen.
and do joint lives. They've always been like so grainy. But we'll try it.
It's our voices that matter.
It's true. Amen to that. It's our voices that matter. So when it comes to
it's our voices that matter.
Yes. We just created a joint hashtag. When it comes to those carvings, I personally, I do not source carvings that don't come from the original culture. Okay, so for instance, so I source Buddha carvings, but I'm sourcing Buddha carvings from my Chinese supplier who works with Buddha and with Buddhism, and I know that is something that they want to share with the world. So when we have the topic of cultural appropriation, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not perfect, nobody's perfect, our thoughts and opinions change as we learn more information and we grow, and thank God for our 30s, because if I was still in my 20s, jeez Louise. Anyway, but my opinions on this matter personally have ebbed and flowed, because when you speak to somebody from another culture, especially certain religions, they want to share that with you. They, anytime I've spoken with a Buddhist monk, they want those teachings to travel far and wide. And sometimes deities are involved. In Hinduism, sometimes deities are involved as visual reminders of your practice. So I think about Ganesha, and I think about, we could go like the Taras. We could go deep down that rabbit hole. I personally, when I sell my Ganesha statues and my deities, I source them from my Indian suppliers who practice, who share with me. And that's another piece of the ethics part, is that I ask my suppliers, how do you work with these crystals? With your deities? And could be made of crystal or not. I have a Ganesha that's made out of like copper, or I guess copper. It's not exactly a carved crystal. And they share that with me, and then I pass it along to you. And so, but a Zuni bear carving that I'm getting from, that I'm seeing at the shows, that's from carved in China, just because it's popular and it sells well, that's the nuance that's really important to remember, that it's not black and white. A Zuni bear carving is not necessarily a bad thing if coming from a certain source. It's the source and who is making money, because cultural appropriation is about money. Is that what you were going to say?
Yes,
It's about who makes money.
Yes.
It's not about sharing. It's not about sharing culture. It's not that sharing culture is the thing that is negatively detrimental.
Yes.
Thank you. It's that perhaps the people who should not be receiving the funds from that are the ones receiving it.
The people who are benefiting economically from sharing of the culture should be the culture that it comes from.
Exactly. That is cultural appropriation. And I think cultural appropriation is a buzzword that floats around a lot, and people don't look 2 or 3 layers lower, deeper, to see that it comes down to money. I mean, a lot of it comes down to money. So we have to both respect our relationship to money is also what creates the friction in any circle. Having a good relationship to money and understanding how it works and then how it affects the people is part of the critical dance. So
Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys coming into my orange room today and having this conversation.
We're in
the orange room. People would love to have possibly more of these conversations. Someone has suggested Zoom as an option. So think about that there. And everyone loves you guys. And
we love you.
thinks this whole thing was awesome and definitely interested in some more.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks for holding space with all of us as we have this conversation and start this conversation. And if you have more questions, write them down and we'll
want all
address
the
them next
questions.
time. So thank you, everyone.
We love you.
Bye from Tucson.